Hello, in this class we're going to learn how to create activities, lay out your screen, and set properties of your views so we can access them through our code. Let's get started. We can see in the project folder that when we created our first activity, it created two files. One is called main activity, and one, created under the layout folder, is called activity_main. This is the naming convention Android Studio uses when creating these files. The code uses camel case, where each separate word has its first letter capitalized, and the layout file names are all lowercase, with words separated by an underscore. In mainActivity.java, we see that there is a line of code that says set content view r.layout.activity_main. This simply sets the layout of the screen to whatever we have in our activity_main file when this activity is called. And this is the layout. At the bottom, we have two tabs, Design and Text. This is the Design tab and is a visual representation of the layout. If we switch to the Text tab, we get the XML code, or the behind-the-scenes view of how the layout is constructed. So to recap real quick, when you add an activity, Android Studio creates two files, a Java file and an XML file. The Java file is where all of your code gets executed. It's where all of the logic that determines how your app works goes. The XML file determines how your app will look on the user's device. The text editor is how you adjust your layout through code, and the design editor is how you adjust your layout visually. Let's start with the text editor. First, we're going to change the layout from a relative layout to a linear layout. This type of layout is easier to use when you want to get a more rigid looking layout. Basically, all views will be placed either vertically or horizontally depending on the orientation attribute. We're going to set them vertically, so enter Android:orientation equals vertical. Then delete the Hello World text view. Now, when you go back to the Design tab, we can see the layout has been updated in the viewer and in the component tree. Now, since the job of this app is to teach you the core Android functionality, let's add some views to our layout, which we will wire up as we go. First, scroll down until you see the folder icon labeled Text Fields. The first option is plain text, so click and drag that into the screen viewer. You will see the view snap to the top of the page if you drop it close enough. Next, scroll to the top and drag a button onto the layout. Then do the same with the text view. You will see that each view is being stacked vertically on top of each other. This is because we set the layout to a linear layout with a vertical orientation. Now, let's see another way to add views to the screen. Click on button, but this time drag it into the component tree below the text view we just placed. You can see this has the same effect as dropping the view into the screen layout. As views build up on the screen, sometimes it's hard to place them quite right, so it's easier to place them in the component tree. Let's add another text view and another button. Finally, scroll down to the folder icon called Layouts and drag a frame layout onto the screen. This should occupy the remainder of the bottom of the screen. A frame layout is a layout like linear or relative layouts, except that its purpose is to hold only one view. It is commonly used to hold fragments, which is exactly what we will be doing with it. Now that we have our views on screen, let's set some of their properties so we can interact with them later. Click on our first edit text, which currently says name, and click on the Properties tab on the right of the screen. This first tab shows the most commonly used properties of this view, since they are the ones we will change the most often. If you click here where it says View All Properties, we get the whole list of properties we can change. Most of these you will never need except for very special purposes, but we will be using some of them later. Click on these two blue arrows at the top to switch back to the simpler view. First, we will change the ID. The ID is how we will identify this view in the Java file, so try to name them pretty descriptively. We're going to call this arg_edit_text. This is my personal naming convention. Everybody kind of has their own, but I find this works best for me. I say what the view does in shorthand if necessary, and then the type of view that it is. In this case, it's an edit text. I encourage you to use whatever naming convention you'd like, but make sure you keep it consistent as you start to program more. The layout width and layout height combo boxes determine how much space the view will take up on screen. If you click the arrow, you see the two options, Match Parent and Wrap Content. Match Parent makes the view take as much screen space as the containing layout. The Wrap Content makes the view only take up as much space as needed to fully display itself. We'll leave these with the default values. The input type will determine what kind of text input this view will take. Let's click on it and add text at the top. The hint is the text that will be displayed to prompt the user what kind of input the view expects. Let's write "pass this text to activity 2" and click enter. And let's delete name so that our hint is shown. Next, let's do the button, a little quicker this time. Let's stick to our naming convention and name the button Start Activity 2 Button. Let's change the text to Start Second Activity. And let's change the layout width to Wrap Content, just so you can see how that affects the button. Let's select the next text view and set the text to Preference Example. We will never need to access this text, so we don't need to worry about changing its ID. Let's select the next button and change the ID to Counter Button. Set the width to Wrap Content. Select the text view below that and change the text to Fragment Example. Then select the last button and change the ID to Fragment Switcher Button. And the text to Switch Fragments. Lastly, let's select the frame layout at the bottom of the screen and change the ID simply to Container. Alright, nice job. Now we'll need to add that second activity. Right-click on your app project folder and click New. Scroll down to Activity and then select Empty Activity. Let's simply name this activity Activity 2. While Activity 2 usually wouldn't be a very descriptive name, and you should therefore choose something more fitting, in this project the name fits well. I want this project to be something you can look back on when you go on creating much cooler apps, so by naming this Activity 2, anytime that you come back to this project in the future, it will be obvious that this is not the main activity, but the activity we learn how to navigate to and interact with. So leave everything else the same and click Finish. Now you can see in the file structure that we have a file named Activity2 and a layout named Activity_2. In the Java file, which appears here, the content is set to Activity_2. Let's look at that XML file. We need two text views, so let's drag those onto the component tree. Well, we added two text views, but why is the screen only showing one? Oh, right, we have a relative layout. Remember in the other activity when we added the views to the tree and they showed up below each other? This was because we used a linear layout. But this activity is still using the relative layout. So since we didn't tell the text views where to be placed, it showed them in the exact same spot. Let's switch to the text editor to fix this. We could change this to a linear layout like before, but for argument's sake, let's see how the relative layout can be used. Now the second text view needs to be placed relative to the other views on screen or the parent view. Let's add the line Android:layout_below equals. Well, what do we want to set it below? The first text view's ID is TextView4. Not the most descriptive name, so let's change that to header text. Now let's complete the layout below attribute by typing @+id/header text. The @+id is used to indicate that the ID does not yet exist in the resource folder, but once the project is built, it will be. Now if we switch back to the Design tab, we can see that the text views are now both visible, and the second one is indeed laid out below the header text. Now let's set these attributes using the Properties tab. Select the header text and select View All Properties. Scroll to the bottom until you get to text size. It has an @dimension resource, which is a predefined text size. Instead, click on the wrench icon and set the text size to 20. The SP suffix is added to indicate scaled pixels for fonts. Let's do the same with the second text view. It's a little close to the text view above it, so let's change that. Scroll to the top and click the drop down for layout margin. Let's give it a margin of 10 pixels all the way around the view so we can type 10 and click enter. You can see that this has a suffix of DP to indicate device independent pixels. So the margin will be relatively the same regardless of the pixel density of the device this app is on. Lastly, select the header text view and change the text to "You sent the text" and the ID of the bottom text view to argument text. In the next lesson, we can see how we can pass information from one activity to the next. So we're going to type text in our first activity, and in the Java code, send that text to this activity to be displayed. This is exactly what real apps do to send data back and forth. So let's start diving in. See you in the next class. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. This video is part of my series Learn Android Quickly, Beginner Essentials, live now on Udemy. Use the code here, 100 free, and the first 100 people to sign up can take this course absolutely free. I want to spread the good word about Android programming and get more people coding. So thanks again for watching, link in the description, and I'll see you soon.